Welcome back to Sun, Sand, and Soul. Josh Tomey with David Haber and welcoming Ernesto Cuesta, president of the Brickell Homeowners Association. Ernesto, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I know you've had interaction with David in the past, and it's great to meet you for the first time. And I'm going to start by just asking, what is the Brickell? What is the purpose of your association? Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the nature of neighborhood associations versus their condo association and what they're there to accomplish on behalf of their members.
The mission of Brickell Homeowners Association is actually to represent the neighbors in the area, advocate for any issues and matters affecting the quality of life of the residents in the area. And we're very engaged politically and financially on anything that happens in the area.
Also to educate, I presume.
That's number one. Our number one objective since day one had been educating, informing the investors, as well as the residents in the area.
Right.
And there are a lot of condo owners in the Brickell space that are, whether it's foreigners investing in the United States or whether it's locals who have put money in and they have tenants in their space. So we're going to talk today a lot about the impact of Senate Bill 4D, the SERS, I got it right this time.
You did.
SERS studies and, non-waiver of reserves and special assessments for fixing these buildings, what the impact is on the tenants, which are a lot of these young professionals that are, live, work in the Brickell downtown community, as well as the owner investors who have to raise rents because they can't afford to continue to rent for $3,000 or $4,000 a month.
Yeah, we'll dig into that. It strikes me, Ernesto, David and I were saying in our introduction in the show that there's such a population concentration in Brickell. Brickell's such a unique neighborhood, even for Miami. And as big as Miami has gotten, Brickell is still sort of the center of it. It has to inherently give your homeowners a little bit more voice and power, I have to assume, just in terms of politicians, other local officials, because they clearly, they want to be able to attend to the thousands and thousands of residents in the area.
Well, let me, just to give you a perspective about numbers.
Please.
Yeah, let's hear about the numbers.
And people don't really look into this. And by the way, that's one of the things that we do at Brickell Homeowners Association. We follow numbers. We study financial trends. We do a lot of things in order to have knowledge is power. And that's been education and knowledge have been our number one objective since we established the
How many units are there?
He's going to give us some metrics.
I'm going
David's
there.
very impatient, by the way. If anybody who wears a shirt like that, he's moving quickly.
I mean, it might take us maybe 3 hours to talk about it. But this is a very interesting conversation. Brickell area is the most dense area in the city of Miami.
Wow.
We have, as a city, we're the biggest city in the state of Florida, as we all know. But Miami, barely, probably we're making it now probably close to a little bit over 500,000 people.
In terms of actual city of Miami,
yes,
right?
Maybe a little bit more than 500,000 now, very little. And out of that 500,000 or less than 500,000 people, over 125 people live in the Brickell area.
125,000.
125,000.
So about 25% of the city of Miami lives in the
that tells you how dense is. Yeah.
So if I'm going to run for city commission, I'm going to your meeting because that's
it is a key, and we are projecting that in the next 5 years, if you don't carry whoever runs for office, if you don't carry county-wise commissioner or city commissioner in the area, or even a mayor of Miami, if you don't carry the Brickell area,
you don't win.
You're not
going to win.
It becomes an impossibility.
You're not going to win.
Just in terms of voters. It makes perfect sense.
That's
a very powerful group of people with a very large constituency.
Let's put it this way. We are very active with the legislation every year. We just finished this week. We had a retreat with the executive committee, preparing ourselves for our legislative agenda for 2025.
And Vicky Lopez, who's a state representative,
that is
her district covers Brickell.
That is correct.
And she's very heavily involved in the state legislation.
Same as Senator Calatayud which Alexa, she has been very helpful. We work with Ms. Lopez, Representative Lopez, very close on the condo laws, and especially also with Senator Bradley, very active.
That's the female legislator from the West Coast.
From Clay. Right. No, actually, she's from Clay County, south, or actually Jacksonville area.
Okay.
Jacksonville.
Well, we're going to have Representative Lopez on the show shortly.
That will be excellent,
and we're looking forward to her conversation. I think we're, if you will,
and Mayor Levine Cava.
Yeah, we're welcoming the county mayor on the show as well. I think where my mind immediately goes to the point you just made about just the sheer population density, and David and I were talking about before the show started, was how that concentration is broken up into more full-time residents than we often see in Miami-Dade. Because what I know from my history is that we've got a lot of transient residents, we have a lot of seasonal residents, and even though that's been shifting over time, I have to imagine Brickell, with the number of professionals who are there, the number of younger people who are there, that there is a high concentration of full-time residents as well, which has to also change the perspective.
Well, actually, good point. For the last decade, 10 years, we had seen a major shift in the people living in the Brickell area. Last decade, you had seen more families with children.
Wow.
Living in the Brickell area. Because probably remember, housing had become an issue here. Purchasing a house, a single-family home is extremely expensive nowadays for a lot of families, especially young families.
And especially in the city.
So they have opted to live probably close to where they work, to their offices in downtown, or either downtown or Brickell. And they have moved for either they're renting or buying in the area.
And that's gonna and that expense is gonna change with the SERS and the special assessments.
It is changing already.
Yeah.
We have a crisis. There is a condo crisis. We projected this crisis 2.5 years ago. And when we projected this crisis, we said we are going to be heading into the condo industry is heading into the MRI. A lot of people kept saying MRI. What do you mean MRI? Maintenance, reserves, and insurance.
Wow.
We projected it 2.5 years ago.
And here I thought that was imaging for your body at a hospital.
You're actually right about that, which is another technical win for you today, but not what he's talking about.
Magnetic resonance imaging. Did I get it right?
You did, and you only got it right because you've had so many of them. But I just want
to
get back to Brickell.
Okay.
So let me ask you an immediate follow-up question. How did you predict that? I mean, we can say as professionals we probably had some of the same inclinations, but I'm interested how a resident body was doing research, educating itself enough to have some of that same purview.
And we have been trying to educate and informing our constituents about the MRI. The thing is that not too many people listen to it.
Did they believe you?
And I tell you where everything started. We follow the legislation every year. Unfortunately, we as voters and residents and citizens, we have the tendency of forgetting that our laws are made in Tallahassee. We have the tendency of following politics in D.C., locally, but not in Tallahassee. Our laws are made in Tallahassee. So we have been very active with the legislature year after year after year.
And I'm sure you have input on that legislation.
And we do. I'm going there. Back, most of these laws that they have been enacted in 2022, they were in the books, getting dirt and dust, because there was no compromise from the major parties. Back in the years, and I'm talking about years ago, the only representative that was very active in condos was Representative Julio Robaina. I don't know if you recall them.
Yes.
Very well.
And actually, he didn't have the support even of his own party. Eventually, he got out of the politics, but he was really a proponent of a lot of laws to protect unit owners in condos. But after decades, the only representative actually that have been involved heavily in condos laws, it has been Representative Vicky Lopez. But going back to 2017, just to mention one of them, the BDA, the bidirectional amplifiers, that was on the table to implement it. Actually, it was passed to take effect in 2019. And what happened then? The pandemic. Most of these laws were there in the works. Lack of compromise. The pandemic came. Nothing happened.
Extension.
No, what happened? A year later.
The Surfside
2021.
The Surfside
Boom.
tragedy.
Right.
That was the iceberg.
Right.
That was the tip of the iceberg. So most of the representatives said,
that was like the Titanic
that's it.
moment.
This is the moment. We have to seize the moment.
Right.
These are the things that we had on the table. We never acted on it. This is the time.
Right.
As a matter of fact, at the end of 2021, we were working with some legislators because we knew that this was coming. And that's why we start saying MRI is around the corner.
Right.
And then why we thought about maintenance reserves and insurance? Because there was a major economic impact in our economy because of the pandemic. The cost of living went up, cost of materials and supplies.
Labor.
Construction costs.
I mean, all of this,
housing,
it was this was
the perfect
the
storm.
perfect storm that nobody was forecasting, and we did.
I want to interrupt because I have a question that I've asked some other guests before, and I've also asked some of my colleagues and even clients. Do you feel like what was ultimately legislated was really just catching up with what should have been done years and years ago anyways, that this was really fixing, I mean, it was done under the guise of a crisis, and I understand why, and for all good reasons, but a lot of people feel these laws were long overdue at some level or another.
It is like the expansion of our expressways is the necessity that we have to have expanded the metro rail. Same thing. This was...
And we're always behind the times.
We are behind 20 years.
We agree.
We are behind 20 years.
If not more.
Being very conservative and nice, 20 years.
Ernesto is nice.
What, and by the way, I can't go any further without, number one, complimenting you on your suit and your tie.
He always dresses
those are
incredibly.
Uniforms, my uniforms.
Dressed impeccably. I think we actually need to make this a standard for all of our guests, is just say this is, to
just them, not us.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
So I think we agree, and I think a lot of people share that sentiment. My follow-on question is, putting aside, the fact that we still haven't seen these laws fully in action yet. Obviously, we know that a lot of that begins to take place in 2025, and there's certain extensions into later years, circumstance depending. Do you feel like this legislation did what it was intended to do? Is it effective legislation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have no doubts about it. I think that what they have to do now is enforce it.
And that's going to be a problem because the DBPR and the Division of Condominiums doesn't have enough people, and it doesn't have enough funding, in my opinion.
No, you have a good point there. Now,
you can pass all the laws in the world, but if you can't enforce them, it doesn't matter.
Representative Lopez, once you bring her here in your show, she will tell you she brought more money.
I know she
to
did.
expand the staff, to be more proactive. She has been very proactive.
Yes, she has.
And another thing is talking about information, education. We need to have better board members.
Amen. Sophisticated board members.
We need to change that mentality. The mentality of volunteers. We are not in agreement with that mentality. You are a volunteer in a non-profit organization where you don't have any special interest, only the cause of your heart and helping
this is your
other
pocketbook,
people.
not just your heart.
When you are sitting in a board, and this was our mentality since we established this organization in 1990. First of all, we established this organization because we wanted to protect our investments in the Brickell area. There was this group of individuals that they had a vision that this was going to take place. It's about vision. Life is about vision. And it's about leadership. And they saw it coming. And it's what we are experiencing right now. But number one is to protect our investments. And how we protect our investments, we need to help you as a businessman, as a politician, to do well. Because if you do well, we're going to do much better.
Right.
And we have a community with extremely high unemployment, with lack of schools, with not quality of life for the residents. Our investments are going to go down the drain. So this is about a special interest. So we don't feel that we are in these associations as volunteers. We are there because we're investors.
And so let me ask, and I think it's a very astute qualification, because I think there's so much in the condo world that we can, in the state of Florida, that we can point out as being flawed, from a legislative perspective, from a logistical perspective, to say, our board members, is absent any other qualification process, absent criminal background, to basically say anybody can be a board member. Should that be the only threshold? We know that. And again, with all due respect to the laws that are currently on the books, the idea that signing off on a on a sheet of paper that says I've read the laws and I've read my DCCRs, the number of board members I've seen sign that who don't know the laws and don't know their DCCRs, and they sign it anyways.
Well, now you have to have a 4-hour course. Right. Okay, which it used to be 1 hour a year. Now it's a 4-hour course.
But imagine, David, when we put this in context, because these are not our parents' or grandparents' condo associations any longer. You're talking about
millions of
hundreds of millions of dollars in a single asset, billions of dollars of real estate. I mean, I can't even imagine you probably, because it sounds like you're a numbers guy. I can't even estimate the number of billions of dollars that is probably sitting inside of your neighborhood association, the BHA. But with all that being said, I've also heard the argument, and I'm not saying I agree, but I've heard the argument that the most recent legislation, 4D most notably, is actually compounding a crisis in the short term, even if its intent in the long term is to fix it. And I understand you disagree with it, but I'd like to understand how you disagree, because we've seen in the news special assessments being passed, obviously some things that have occurred within your own neighborhood association that we know of and we've talked about on the show. How do you respond to that when people are also facing the prospect of 5, in some cases 6-figure special assessments and significantly increasing maintenance rates?
I have the answer for you.
I'm ready.
It have been neglected.
Oh, for sure. For years, decades.
For decades.
Well, now we're paying the piper.
It is like you are not preparing yourself for a retirement plan.
Right.
It's when you are not servicing your car. You have a new car. And if you don't change the oil, what happens?
Right.
You need a new engine.
In life, you have consequences for the lack of actions.
Right.
And this is the consequences for the lack of the actions.
How much of that do you attribute politically versus financially? How much of this was the politics of doing the right thing versus the financial consequences that people saw for doing the right thing?
I would say 50 and 50%, to be fair. 50-50%.
And remember,
because I blame also our elected officials for not taking a step, a stand. Remember, when you are an elected official, you are not elected to only make decisions that are popular. You are elected to make decisions that are unpopular.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's hard to get reelected.
And they don't want most of them. That's why this is an accumulation of neglect from both sides, from owners and from politicians, that they look the other side.
But remember, there were also, there was a lot of development of Brickell in the early 2000s, and then the crisis came, the real estate.
2008, 2009, right?
Right. And that lasted for like 5 years. And part of the problem there was, if you had actually not waived reserves, your foreclosure rate would have gone even higher than it was, and it was very high all around South Florida. So it's interesting because the neglect of the buildings for a period of 5 to 10 years causes exponential damage down the road.
Well, a lot of people asked me when 1060 Brickell was recently in the news. I got a lot of phone calls of people saying, I'm scared now. This building is only 15, 16 years old. How is it possible that they're facing a $21 million special assessment?
Lack of reserves. What do you expect? I mean,
and lack of maintenance for a period of 15 years.
Listen, this is the bottom
preventative
line.
maintenance.
The bottom line is neglect.
We've had engineers on the show, Ernesto, and one of the things that we've brought up, and in the context of your answer there, and I'd love to hear from you on this because of how educated you are on this issue and how much education you do, is reserves often don't contemplate a lot of the issues that these buildings are facing. So while reserves are certainly critical, and there's no argument certainly from us, we also know that not every association, in fact, I would probably say most associations do not reserve for what a lot of these associations are facing. Major structural overhaul. Obviously the law has changed and there's some accommodations around that. But had they been reserving, and I guess to both of you, but Ernesto first, had they been reserving all along, would that have solved the issue, or is that just a piece of the issue because we also don't have a reserve process in place that really takes into account where we live and how these buildings were constructed to begin with?
Again, and that's a confusion, and part of the lack of information and education on behalf of the owners, of the investors. Remember that the traditional reserves, this is important because there is a difference between traditional reserves and the SERS. The SERS surface because the structural problems that
traditional reserves were only for certain items.
Paint, driveway, roof.
And anything else, concrete, anything else outside of those vital equipment
was special assessment.
Were special assessments.
Which they didn't want to do.
And exactly. And they were part of the operational budget.
Right.
Operational budget, nothing to do with the vital equipment that you have to reserve, or the pavement, or the garage, and things like that on the roof that they were the normal traditional reserves.
And therefore not protected funds, and therefore when you had crisis like you did in 2008, 2009, you're spending those operational funds. Maybe there was a capital contingency account, but that was spent.
Listen, and also people were spending money on the lobby and the pool because that's what people buy when they're investing, and they're not looking. Nobody kicks the tires of the garage and the structural slab. That's not where people are looking when they're looking at buying a condo.
They are now.
They are now. But I wanted to ask you a question also. You're supposed to paint and deal with waterproofing during the painting process every 7-8 years.
Let's say 10 years.
Okay. Well, it's actually less, but let's say 10 years. Do you agree that a lot of these buildings were pushing it out to 12 years? And
Absolutely.
13 years?
Absolutely.
And that is a huge problem for the concrete.
Remember, most of the owners, when they buy into it, and at that point in time, there were a lot of retirees, people that retired already, and they sold their homes and then they purchased their condo, thinking that that was the end. They're going to live there forever.
Right.
So remember, prices goes up every year. Your income from retirement
does not
go. Fixed income versus inflationary.
It's a big difference.
And you're kicking the can to the next owner because you figure they did a paint job 2 years ago. I may not be alive in 12 years, so I'm not going to worry about it.
They felt, listen, I'm not going to be living here forever. I'm going to pass away or move out or whatever at one point in time in my life, or I'm going to sell maybe within 5 years after I.
So why should I pay for it?
Why should I pay for a reserve that I'm not going to?
I'm not going to be the beneficiary.
I'm going to be benefit.
I always use the term musical chairs. The last person standing pays the price. Everybody is going around the musical chairs, getting a chair for free until the last guy doesn't have a chair and he has to pay the price.
Right.
David, I don't know if you have clients nowadays, and I do a lot of.
I do have clients, but let's see.
Nowadays, what I was going to say that they had been in this budget year, where some associations, as we speak today, December the 19th, 2024, they are trying to get enough votes to only partially fund the SERS.
Oh, because they know they have an extra. They think they have an extra year, and so let's kick it to next year.
I'm still outside of the enforcement. Right.
But here's the point. Next year,
They're going to have to pay more.
It's going to be 100%,
right?
Plus the 50% that they didn't do this
plus the difference, right?
Let me go back again.
They're taking a third mortgage is basically what they're doing.
When at the end of 2021, we reached out to the Senate leaders of these laws that were going to be enacted in 2022. We were the first one to reach out to the Senate leadership and ask them, listen, we feel that most associations are not ready for these laws. Can we, instead of enforcing them in 2025 and 2026, can we extend it maybe 3 more years? And the answer was, we don't have the appetite to do that. And you know what? I felt it a little bit shaky with that, but
now you're glad.
No. Within maybe a week, I realized that they were right.
Of course,
and that's why we supported. And another thing that I want to point it out, that these laws were enacted in 2022, and there were lawyers, colleagues of you. There were professional accountants, professional managers, insurance people. Saying, don't worry. In the next session, these laws are going to be minimized. They're going to lower the standards. Everything is going to change. Nothing is going to change.
But I do want to say this. The damage to concrete is exponential. If you don't fix it now, it's not like it's not like inflation where you pay 3 or 5 or 7% more.
Right.
The damage is exponential. So a $4 million problem, if you wait 3 years, doesn't become a $4.6 million problem. It becomes a $14 million problem.
Right.
People just don't understand that.
It's like subprime borrowing. You're not borrowing at prime rate. And so therefore, when you're paying 18% per year, you get into a situation where you can't ever catch up with it. And therefore, you're in the hole.
But the reality is that your first it's like your first loss is your cheapest loss in real estate. The sooner you fix it, the cheaper it is to fix. And if you want to use the analogy of the engine and putting in the oil, if you put in the oil, the engine lasts. And if you don't put in the oil, you blow the engine. And now you need a new engine, an entire new engine rather than a valve job.
Right.
And even if you put a new oil in your engine is going to last forever.
Right. It's not forever.
Well, that's a very good point as well.
Yeah. So let's circle back to the Brickell Homeowners Association, and I'd love to hear from you, Ernesto, on how you feel like these laws have specifically impacted Brickell, maybe in ways that are different than it's impacted other areas, because it is such a unique environment.
No, I think it had impacted the area, but in different manners and in different ways. Realistically, most people that live in the Brickell area are well off, or they have a different income level like most residents in the city of Miami. But everybody have been impacted. There is no doubt about it. But the people that even are in an executive committee, for example, our members, they understand that we have to go through this process. There is no doubt about it. And some of them have been impacted heavily. In Brickell Key, different parts on the Brickell area.
With that as the backdrop, and I love your MRI. I think that's great, and I'm going to remember that one. I might even steal it every once in a while.
Maintenance research.
I love it. What are the goals right now of the BHA? Are they mostly focused in these areas because it is such a prolific crisis?
We are focusing in these areas. We are focusing also in the new legislative session. Since you touched that issue, I just want to mention a few that we're working on it.
Please.
We're working on eliminating the threshold to hold whole elections. I think the 20% threshold to hold elections is hitting good people that wants to run for office.
Especially in condos where there's 400 and 500 and 600 units.
And they are these individuals that they
stay forever.
Exactly.
8 years.
You are disenfranchising people that they want to serve accordingly.
Do you feel like
that's one of them?
Even in the era of electronic voting, that has not improved that issue for you?
The 20% is a block. It's a roadblock.
That's the block.
What are the other short-term issues you're dealing with in the legislature?
Condo terminations.
One of my favorite subjects.
Condo. Well, as a matter of fact, you remember that I think that the first conference that we made was with some of your lawyers, with an investors group at the World Trade Center. By the way, we did it a year ago, something like when nobody was talking about it actually, and it was coming. Condo termination is something that it is around the corner.
I wrote an article about it where I made it very clear that a 5% unit owner ability to block a termination was way too low a level, and it needed to be in the 15 to 20% level. And I wrote in that article that they also needed to lower their percentage to something like 70 to 75% in order to terminate a condo. Because if 3/4 of the people want to terminate the condo, you should be allowed to terminate the condo, and it should take more than 5% to block you. It should take 15%. And if you don't do that, you run into the problem of the buildings not getting fixed. You're in a limbo situation. The developer's waiting to get the rest of the people to sign up, and the building's just getting worse and worse.
I've heard some interesting theories on cause and effect legislation in this area, where to say if a building is not being maintained properly by way of the threshold of these new laws, that it could change that percentage, which essentially, therefore, the cause and effect is to say, if you're a healthy building, you can maintain that 5% because you're basically saying the building is capable of sustaining itself. But if you've proven financially the building's incapable of sustenance,
but that's a subjective determination.
Well, you're either, I mean, listen, there's a pass.
That's why I like the 15%.
But there's a pass-fail effect to some of this legislation, which is to say, have you done your SERS and is it funded in full? And if it's not, you're failed, and now 75% can terminate.
Well, but that's the point. That's why we honestly we're working hard on this matter, because this is putting people's life at risk.
Sure.
Okay.
I agree with that.
And this is totally neglect and denial. There are associations whose buildings are falling apart.
They need to be terminated.
They don't. But so if you don't terminate this, you know what is going to happen? I tell you, something simple is going to happen. The cities, municipalities, and the county are going to come and they condemn the building.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the condos effectively
right.
It's going to be terminated by default. Right.
This is math. It's better to get $5 today than nothing tomorrow.
Let me ask you long-term goals. Mm-hmm. I know those are two of your short-term goals. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, what's the third short-term goal before I get to long-term goals?
Oh, God. I tell you, you are killing myself now, my memory here. We just work closely on this. I mean, there are so many issues that...
well, let me ask you long-term. Then let me switch to long-term. I think the two big issues long-term are traffic. Well, three. Traffic,
no,
insurance.
Him or
but I thought that you were talking about legislature, but needs. I tell you that the things that we are aiming right now, that they're important not only in the area but in Dade County and also as well as in Miami. Affordability, housing,
affordable housing. Agreed.
Transportation and income gap in income. We don't have major companies in Miami. We have to attract more companies to invest in the city here. I know Saradale is moving headquarters down here. We need to bring major companies. Most of our younger generation here, they are number one. They
can't afford to live here.
Well, actually, let's start by saying that we have an exile of potential, skillful, and educated young people that they are leaving the city of Miami. I'm talking about city of Miami now. I think that the statistics that we have seen in this, that 300 people move in and 200 people move out. And most of them are young people.
Right. And there's a brain drain quality to that because you're losing educated people, you're losing younger people. Right.
You are. So housing is a major issue. Income gap is a major issue. Transportation is a major issue. I mean, if you don't have a car here, you're dead.
Right. And we've talked about that a lot.
Mass transportation is in a metropolitan city like Miami.
George Perez talked about if you want to be a major international city, you have to have an infrastructure of transportation for people to get out of their cars. I want to ask you about flooding on Brickell, because flooding
is there flooding in Brickell?
No.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the next topic.
But this is a good subject. There's only a section, the news. Remember, the news attracts attention, and they excel.
Where's the section?
I'll tell you. The section of between 8th Street and 12th.
On Brickell.
Right. Is the one that you had seen, flooded. But why have been flooded? Because the water pumps of the city
were
not working. When we went to Public Works and we went in front of the commission, we confronted the director of Mr. Haber, the director of Public Works. They installed new motors and new pumps and things like that. The problem is that why they didn't work? They didn't work because lack of maintenance and because they didn't have the staff to provide the maintenance of those pumps.
Right. And I've heard a lot of people criticize the city, fair or unfair, that the city has not grown on a governmental basis at the pace, the population, and the density has expanded, and therefore they're not keeping up. And that's a lot of building department, public works, that there's issues around that. And it's hard because we know that government, especially local government, there's a lot of red tape, and it's not easy to do. It sounds like your group is working hard around that issue as well.
We're. So since David challenging me on some issues that we mentioned about the 20% threshold. We mentioned about the condo termination, so we were pushing for the 50% plus 1%.
Wow, that's lower than me.
Well, you have to start negotiating at the lower level in order to get something working.
I say 75% and 15%.
But I like the tack though, because to say if you say 75, it's only going to go up from there.
Okay.
You're dealing with legislators.
So 50% plus 1%. That's what we're aiming at. The other thing that we are touching bases is the live and local, mixed commercial and residential. That's important. It's very, as a matter of fact, if you look at read the law, it's at the discretion of the city. It's very contradicting. So that is important, talking about affordability and housing needed. And the other issue, you as a lawyer, you're going to say, oh, wow.
I already said, oh, wow, to termination at 50% plus 1.
We are trying to enforce that property management for buildings or properties with more than 25 units to be administered by professional property management companies instead of self-management.
Well, self-management for large condos, I am always against. Anything other than
the stats bear it out.
There is no structure.
Right.
The resources are not there.
And think about how much money is involved where one manager could steal, and what do you have?
Or board members or just a lack of access to industry that does not
provide
information. Right. Yeah.
Right. So at the local level, since you are challenging me, what are you doing or what are you pursuing? Miami 21. We have to revise Miami 21. So we're working on that.
Let me ask you another question.
I haven't finished.
Okay.
We need to.
He did his homework.
This is preparation.
This is.
You should take notes on these notes.
We are aiming to do something at Simpson Park, which is actually the central park for Miami.
Right.
We need to revamp that community center to establish and link educational programs for kids. That park is not functional, and it is a beauty. It's a
big, gorgeous park.
So I mean, that's since you challenged.
That's a significant.
I
agenda.
asked you. I didn't challenge.
That's a significant agenda.
I asked.
So I've got one question.
I want to ask my question. Well,
let me go to one question. Then we got to go to break and then what we're going to.
But I won't remember my question.
Let's go to. He is 65 years old, so we're going to give him the break on that. The memory runs short.
One of the things I ask the people on Miami Beach and Miami and Sunny Isles, and I think it's a big issue, and it has to do with affordable housing and live local. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of these luxury condos that are now going for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a square foot. Where do the workers live that work for these buildings and for the owners in these buildings? Because now they live in Pembroke Pines, they live in Homestead, they live in West Kendall. It's an hour and a half drive to get to work. To me, that's not sustainable. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. And that's what the transportation issue, it is important because not even having, again, the income gap, along with the transportation, lack of mass transportation, is hitting our community.
Right.
What did we said before when we started our conversation? That I need you, we need to help you to succeed in whatever you do. Because if you succeed, we're going to do better. We need to have a productive, a wealthy and healthy community in order for me to succeed in my investments.
Do you agree that condo associations are going to have to pay labor real wages, not $12 and $14 an hour, because they can't afford to drive from West Kendall or Pembroke Pines or Homestead with the gas prices? We need to pay a better wage, which means higher maintenance fees in order to address the issue of having less of an income gap.
I agree with you. And let me go
See,
further.
that's now twice that he agreed with me.
Let me go further than that. I think also it's part of the elected officials' compromise, social compromise, to sit down with the developers and start informing them, educating them of the situation that we are confronting right now in our community with the housing affordability. And make them aware that listen, you are in business to make money. I get it. We are. We have a business to make money, not to lose money. We are not non-profit. We are not for profit. We are here. When you are in business to make money, but you have to have some type of compromise, social compromise to your community, to where you are building. So you have to make them aware that, yes, we are allowing you to develop, build your buildings. Don't do it only for the high end.
So what do you think of Mayor Weinberg from Aventura, who we have on tomorrow, working with Related?
That's the way it should be.
To come up with this thing where teachers and firemen and police
That's the way it should be. That is the way it should be.
It's a fascinating model. We're going to dig into that.
And we're going to dig into that tomorrow. Workforce housing.
Workforce.
Right in the same building.
It's about leadership.
It's live work. It's to say the investment of people who live in a community is very different.
It is about leadership. It is about leadership.
I agree with you, because if the leadership isn't going to do what may be unpopular today, we're not going to end up where we want to be tomorrow.
Listen, we have to have mixed developments.
Yep.
Because, you have to remember that the vertebrate of our economy are the carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers. Actually, they are part of what we call condo business nowadays.
Sure.
Which is the biggest enterprise in Miami. It's made up by all of these entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs like plumbers, electricians.
I always say in Miami, if we, a great business in anywhere in Florida is air conditioning, plumbing,
sure,
and pool service.
Sure, absolutely.
You can make good money as a worker and as a business owner.
And those are the people that we have to help them to become successful.
Yes.
Right? Because if they could become too successful, we're going to do much better.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back with Ernesto, we're going to talk on some specific issues that have been in the news and expand on some of what we've been talking about further. So you're listening to Sun, Sand, and Soul with Josh Tomey and David Haber. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, Instagram, X, and all your other favorite social media and streaming feeds. We'll be right back with Ernesto Cuesta.